thanks for joining me. If you are new, welcome. If you are returning, welcome again. My name is Amstel, and thanks for joining me on our rune study course. And don't forget, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss another one of these wonderful episodes, because I'm hoping my studies don't get me so distracted, and I will get them more frequently with a little bit more diversity in content. But anyways, this is our third episode and our second rune, and that is Uruz. And Uruz has probably been a lot more difficult than I'd like to admit, and there's a lot of information that I have to go over, and I hope that I can still maintain eye contact with you guys. So if I look a little creepy and constantly looking down, I apologize. Oh my goodness. So there's a lot to unpack here. Go ahead and get comfortable. As always, I'm going to have links down in the description, links down to the blog so that you can read up on this at your leisure. I'm going to have more of a bibliography instead of my usual just links for your leisure. Just for the sheer fact there's so much information in this. So much information. So go ahead, get comfortable. I'm going to do my best to keep this as brief as I possibly can, but wow. So, when we study runes, the first thing you're going to start realizing the more you get into this is that it's not about just studying 3 different poems and examining their symbols or the societies for that matter and how they apply to modern society. It's actually 3 different languages across an enormous span of time. Okay, I mean, we're talking thousands of years, for God's sake. It's 2019 going into 2020. So, like anything, we do have to start with the linguistics. So, the word Uruz, and this is taken from Wikipedia. Again, I'm not an elitist. Wikipedia is an incredible free source to access information, so academic elitists can kiss my ass. So the word Uruz is a Latin word, but was borrowed into Latin from Germanic. So Old English, Old High German Ur, Old Norse Ur. In German, Old High German Ur was compounded with also ox, giving Oroso. If I haven't mentioned already, by the way, Uruz means aurochs, which became early modern aurochs. The modern form is aurochos. I think I pronounced that correctly. The word aurochs was borrowed from early modern German, replacing archaic aurochs, also from an earlier form of German. The word is invariable in number in English, though sometimes a back form singular auroch and or innovative plural aurochses occur. It is directly parallel to the German plural oxen or ox, and recreates by analogy the same distinction as English ox is singular and oxen plural. So that gives us the etymology of the word aurochs. So we do know for a fact that it did come from the German word Uruz, all right? At least the Anglo-Saxon letter Uruz, this guy right here. So if you haven't discovered it yet, Wikipedia does have a portal on the Elder Futhark. I do encourage you to at least go and step into that. In the Ur, parentheses rune, again, bibliography, check it out, it's awesome article. It does give us a little more insight. So the Icelandic word for rain and the Old English word for aurochs go back to 2 different Proto-Germanic words, Uruz and Ura, although possibly from the same roots. The Norwegian meaning dross slag is more obscure, but may be an Iron Age technical term derived from the word for water. So that's also really interesting. And that's going to be really important when we actually get further into actually reading the poems later on. So go ahead and put a pin into that, because right now we're really looking at the meaning of the word or the letter. So the case can be made for all 3 meanings, water, slag, or dross, and aurochs. But since legus translates into leak or water or lake, and that's another letter coming up in the alphabet, but more or less represents water in its liquid form, and we'll have Isa to represent ice in its solid form, water. I'm gonna stick with tradition on this one, and Uruz means aurochs, at least in this case, because again, you know, we can make the case for all of these definitions. There is plenty of history, but again, this is a modern study and collective representation, y'all. After a while, everyone agrees that it just became aurochs. So, all right. That being said, now that at least I've agreed upon the meaning of it being aurochs, what was an aurochs? The hell was an aurochs? Well, an aurochs is the wild ancestor to a domesticated cow. That would be a wolf to, that would be, an aurochs is to a cow as a wolf is to a dog. I know, I threw those analogies out there to you. So, interestingly enough, cattle were amongst the first animals to be domesticated by man. And unlike our other domesticated animal partners, their wild counterparts actually went extinct in the wild. And interestingly enough, aurochs went extinct in the wild in the 1600s when the last one died in Poland of natural causes. So here's where it gets really crazy. 400 years later, we are desperately trying to recreate or rewild the domestic cow by a process called backbreeding. Now, this process utilizes genetic information salvaged and mapped from viable fossils, because cows are actually one of the first animals that we have actually fully mapped the genetic genome of. We actually mapped their genome before we were able to finish human genome mapping. It's pretty significant, actually. It really is. So this process utilizes genetic information salvaged and mapped from viable fossils and then compared to modern specimens with compatible genetic traits, with the ultimate goal being to reconstruct an extinct species. Not a new breed of cow, but reconstruct or re-engineer an extinct species. And this was originally proposed by the Huck brothers in the 1920s, that a species isn't exactly extinct as long as all of its genes are still present in the living population. So just to give you some information of how interesting that is, that would be like saying Neanderthals aren't actually extinct because all of their genes are still present in the living population today. By the way, I'm not 100% Homo sapien. My DNA test came back, I'm actually 2% Neanderthals, and that came from Nat Geo's DNA test. So I'm not even 100% human. I'm actually a hybrid. That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, anyways, I digress. Point of the matter is that would be like taking a bunch of humans from Europe and then breeding them together, telling them to have children in such a way that eventually their offspring would recreate Neanderthals. Yeah, that's really interesting. This isn't the same thing as cloning, by the way. And the reason why we're doing that is because the aurochs played such an important role in the ecology of Europe that its absence is beginning to have such a detrimental effect to the climate, to the environment, that humanity is going to great lengths to reanimate this extinct species. That's how important it was to its environment. So yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. First we tamed it, then we killed it, now we're trying to resurrect it. So, and you can check the Wikipedia article, which I'll probably have them linked in the page here. I know I have them linked in my blog post, but there are actually several projects going on at once, one of which, and I cannot make this up at all, is called the Uruz Project. And just to clarify here, again, this is not the same thing as cloning a mammoth from a fossil. This is taking genetic information from modern living cows and breeding them to eventually get the right animal. This is not the same thing. Cloning is a completely different process. It's taking viable genetic information, injecting it into a fertilized embryo, and that embryo's genetic material is creating an exact copy. This is a little different. Actually, it's a hell of a lot different. That being said here, there's just so much information on this animal that I want to go over here that I really just don't have the time for. I could give a whole class on this rune, and one day I probably will, but I don't have the time or the space for it, and so I'll just have to, hope to hell that this crash course is going to be enough. So, but at the very least, I do need to mention the level of universal importance that cattle, wild and domestic, have had to humanity. Almost since the beginning of time, humans have revered and worshipped our bovine friends. Important enough to prehistoric man to be included in the Lascaux paintings and exalted in every single culture they appeared, from North America to Far East Asia, including our own ancient Norse societies. And speaking of our own ancient Norse societies, we find them in our lore, such as Audluma, who sustained the giant Ymir and licked Buri from the ice, and we find them in the first two letters of the Elder Futhark, just to give you an example of how we as modern heathens and our ancient counterparts revered these cattle, okay? Revered both the wild and the domestic counterparts. So there's no doubt about it. These were sacred to our ancient ancestors far more than we tend to give them credit for. They're very underrated. Now, speaking of our ancient ancestors, Julius Caesar actually wrote about these animals in his Gallic war commentaries. This is where I went crazy, guys, when I started doing research in Uruz, as I started pooling all the primary resources. So I actually started double checking a lot of the references that Diana Paxson mentioned in here, and she mentioned that Tacitus talked about it in Germania. He never mentioned Uruz in Germania or any of his other manuscripts that I've ever found. Now, I really hope to get into contact with her and ask her if she recalls where in Tacitus's writings that she found that passage, because I really want to know where he wrote that, because that's a pretty significant portion of it. As far as I could tell in my research, she was the one who mentioned it. Freya Aswin also repeated it. That book was published in 1998. This one got published. When was this? Freya Aswin was published in 1998, and this was published in 2005. So Freya Aswin actually was the one who started that rumor. So, okay, I haven't discredited Diana Paxson, just Freya Aswin. Okay. So that's when I started going wild, as I started, double cross-referencing all these primary resources. So, anyways, Julius Caesar, in his account of the Gallic War commentary, says, these animals, which are called Uri, it's Latin. These are a little below the elephant in size, and of the appearance, color, and shape of a bull. Their strength and speed are extraordinary. They spare neither man nor wild beast which they have espied. These the Germans take with much pains in pits and kill them. The young men harden themselves with this exercise and practice themselves in this sort of hunting, and those who have slain the greatest number of them, having produced the horns in publics to serve as evidence, receive great praise. But not even when taken very young can they be rendered familiar to men and tamed. The size, shape, and appearance of their horns differ much from the horns of our oxen. These they anxiously seek after and bind at the tips with silver and use as cups at their most sumptuous entertainments. So right there, we already have references to aurochs horns being used as drinking horns. So we already know how important and revered these cattle are. If you've ever been to a bloat, if you've ever frequented a heathen message board, you'll know how important a drinking horn is, okay? Especially in a bloat. I mean, hell, you don't even have to do that. Just go look at a couple of prostitute Instagram files, and they're just obsessed with them, for God's sake. It's embarrassing. I can't decide if they're actually really trying to honor the god or they're just trying to see how much meat they could chug out of a horn. Dude, sit down. No one's going to beat Thor. Then no, you don't have to die trying. Seriously, just stop. I digress. But something in that description really caught my attention. Julius Caesar, perhaps one of the greatest generals of ancient European history, described them as being slightly smaller than an elephant. Say what? So remember when I said I grew up on a farm and my people were cattle people, particularly dairy cattle? I would not describe bulls as slightly smaller than elephants. Now, if you know anything about elephants, you'll know that there's two different species. So you've got your African elephants and you've got your Asian elephants. So African elephants are probably already out of the picture. They're more he's probably more referencing your Asian elephants because those are already slightly smaller. The good news is we actually have a really good fossil record of aurochses. So how big was an aurochs? Well, during the Holocene era, which for those of you who aren't very familiar with that is our current geological era, which started about 10,000 years ago, the aurochs from Denmark and Germany had an average height at the shoulders of 61 to 71 inches in bulls and 53 to 61 inches in cows. All right. And yeah, that would have put them at about the same size as an Asian elephant. And they ran anywhere between 1,500 pounds to about 3,000 pounds in weight. I was reading an article that someone in Heathen Women United, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, I apologize, but she linked me to, I want to say it was either the Telegraph or the Guardian, but they were talking about having found aurochs remains at Stonehenge. And these archaeologists were talking about how a single animal could feed 300 people. That's a lot of waste because refrigeration did not exist. So they had to preserve the meat in some way, but still, a single animal could have fed 300 people. I'm not entirely sure how much a modern cow could feed, but a modern cow is anywhere between 500 to 1,000 pounds, if I remember correctly. But I'm also really bad with numbers, so don't quote me on that. I do know that modern cows are bred much, much smaller from the aurochs because that's just a dangerous animal. And speaking of huge and speaking of dangerous, the Romans actually thought, oh, hey, these things are kind of dangerous and they're kind of big and they're kind of hard to kill. Hey, let's put them in the Colosseums. Just in case their size and ferocity has otherwise eluded your imagination, the Romans thought them excellent stock to fight for sport. Just to throw that out there and to reiterate. So, anyways, as the aurochs became rarer, so did the privilege of hunting them. And so hunting one and the manufacture of their drinking horns became a symbol synonymous of high social status. Eventually, hunting became restricted to the nobility, which then became restricted to royalty, and then eventually altogether, as they became endangered, no one could hunt them at all. And the penalty for poaching an aurochs was death, but then poaching any animal in that time period would have been death. So, yeah. And also, I don't think I really would have wanted to try to poach an aurochs anyways, because that's a very conspicuous animal to attempt to try to hide, and there's just easier prey is what I'm trying to say. But anyways, it ended up becoming off limits altogether, and the punishment for poaching one was death. When the last one finally died in 1627, it was a female. According to the game rangers, it was natural causes. The last males, according to the records in Poland where they died, were recorded to have died in the 1620s. So about 7 years before that or some such. Nonetheless, they live on in modern iconography as symbols of nobility and strength. And interestingly enough, Mecklenburg, Germany, where Mecklenburg County takes its name from, sports an aurochs in its coat of arms. Now, I am a Carolina girl. I did grow up in Charlotte, so I find that very interesting because Charlotte, North Carolina resides in Mecklenburg County, and Mecklenburg County, again, being named from Mecklenburg, Germany. I just find that a very interesting coincidence. So, Alrighty. I might end up having to break this up into parts. So now let's go over to our runic poems. In the Anglo-Saxon, the ox is single-minded and overhorned, most savage beast fighting with his horns, well-known moor-stepper. That is a proud creature. In the Old Norse poem, dross comes from bad iron. The reindeer often races over the frozen snow. In the Old Icelandic, lamentation of the clouds and ruin of the hay harvest, an abomination of the shepherd. You know, this is very powerful language considering these are all translated into English. So, at first glance, these poems have absolutely nothing in common. They really don't. And I'll tell you now that as we further our exploration into these poems, this will not be the last time that we will see such strong deviances. So, my preferred strategy when it comes to analyzing poems that seemingly have nothing in common is to try to find common themes, okay? And that's something that I learned when I was in high school in academically gifted bullshit classes that try to give me busy work and pretend it's because I was so much smarter than everyone else. Okay, whatever. But anyways, if there's one common theme that all three of these poems have, and one thing we've learned about our dear friend the aurochs is transformation. Seriously, think about it, okay? And we'll start with the aurochs. We actively engineered, and keep in mind, genetically modified doesn't necessarily mean that we took, gene splicing, Monsanto, this kind of stuff. When you breed something like a dog, that is a genetically modified organism, okay? That is the loosest definition of GMO. I know I'm going to have people kill me over that, but it's true. And that was one of the things that really surprised me when I started learning what the definition of GMO was when I was in biology class in college. And why GMO is just this buzzword that gets thrown around and people don't really know what it was. So anyways, when we think about the animal, we actively engineer the aurochs through a method of selective breeding, which transformed it into a domesticated cow, okay? That's a new animal. We genetically engineered a wild animal into a domesticated animal. And through a combination of factors, mostly man-made, we forced it to extinction. Its absence has created a devastating impact to Europe's environment so dire that we are genetically engineering from modern domesticated cows its wild ancestors. If that's not transformation, I don't know what is. So first we domesticated it, then we killed it, and now we're re-engineering it. I mean, all throughout the history of this animal is nothing but transformation and engineering it. All right. So further, in the Norse poem, dross comes from bad iron, is really describing the smelting process of iron ore, and that is the changing of literal rock into usable metal. So, and that's a process that back in its day it was commonly thought of as magic. Now, I don't remember where I read that from. That was from one of my courses when I was in college reading about medieval history. I just remember that it was just so beyond a lot of people, the technology of the time, it was commonly thought of as magic. And we're not even going to say anything about the sanctity of iron. And we're not even going to say anything about the implications of purity either, of purification, because we don't have the time on it, all right? We're just going to mention it, though. But again, we've got a transformation process because we're talking about turning a solid into a liquid, because you have to melt that ore down into a liquid to get that metal, okay? The reindeer often races over the frozen snow. The mere act of water freezing in and of itself is transformative. But if you look deeper, water and snow freeze so hard in the regions reindeer are found, rivers become solid. Land features that would otherwise be uncrossable for part of the year becomes crossable. So here we have an example of liquid becoming solid. okay? Now, going over to the Icelandic poem, Lamentation of the Clouds. Now, that's obviously rain. The ancient Norse probably didn't have a way of knowing or understanding that the clouds are really water in a gaseous state, but we do, okay? And so now we have an example of gas into liquid. So we have another state of matter transferring, okay? And you'll recall that the water cycle is just water transforming one state of matter to the next. So water, down to its chemical nature, is transformative, okay? Both in esoteric studies and in chemistry, all right? And ruin of the hay harvest. By the way, I didn't even mention the methane cycle on cows. This isn't just a description of bad weather destroying your crops. This is a description of bad weather destroying your harvest, okay? Not just your crops, your harvest, okay? There's a big difference between crops that are still in the field because you can still salvage that. But once you've got your crops harvested and in, that's it. You're done. You're down for the count. You're otherwise. So hay or grain has to be dried before it can be stored, and it's the most vulnerable time in its cultivation, and it's perhaps the one time as a farmer you don't want rain, all right? And rain has the power to transform one's crops into waste, and it also has the power to transform seed into food. So transforming one's crop into waste and from there death. And we'll just skip over the transformative properties of death for the sake of brevity, okay? So there's already stuff of transformation we're already looking at, and we're just scratching the surface here, okay? And the last line, an abomination of the shepherd has got me. I would think that predators or thieves would be the highest threat to shepherds, but floods and destructive rain are probably more common and more unpredictable. So predators and thieves can be dealt with easily and the damage minimized, but bad weather can destroy your whole flock and kill you in the process. So whatever form the threat may take, the result is still the same: labor transformed to waste. So still, all of it, it's transformation. And we have states of matter, all right? The only thing we don't seeing as far as states of matters are concerned is sublimation, which would be solid going into gas, all right? That's the only thing we're not really seeing. And I would be very surprised if I saw that. I'd be excited, but I'd be surprised at the same time just because of the type of physics that requires. But you're getting, and that's nothing but transformation right there. It really is. So but anyways, now we're getting into our final segment: interpretation and use in magic. So I think, let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got about 10 books. I have in my possession 10 of the best-selling or most popular titles on rune reading. And you can pick up almost any of them, and I do mean any of them. And these are all what we call secondary sources, by the way. And most any author will tell you primal creative energy. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Transformation is roughly in the same vein, I feel. They'll also add in strength, masculinity, and destruction. None of these are wrong, except for the masculinity, because both bulls and cows of aurochses have horns, and I will die on that hill, Monkern. I've like, the more I've started studying this for myself, the more that I've started reading his book, I really don't like his stuff anymore. I really don't. He's not a bad guy. He's not a bad guy. I've got nothing against him personal. It's just, he's obviously a man who doesn't really have very much of a grasp of gender roles or whatever. But anyways, I'm sure he's a lovely person. So nothing against him personally. Anyways, What makes Uruz unique, though, isn't that it's a transformative power or that it's a primordial creative energy. It is a transformative power that if we stand to the task, we can control and use to shape our destinies and the world around us, okay? So Uruz can signify a challenge, an obstacle, but never a blockage. That is Isa, okay? We can use Uruz to draw strength, but not just strength, also courage and bravery. Two aspects of strength I think are underrated, and those three things, strength, courage, bravery, all come together to create valor. Things that were things that were highly revered within Nordic society. If I remember correctly, I want to say valor is the root word of, is descended from Valkyrie. I think that's where it comes from. I could be wrong. I need to do some research on that. So put a pin in there. Do not hold me up to that. That is a hypothesis. All right. So either you can take an active role in transforming your life when this rune comes up in your spread, or you can take the passive role and allow your circumstances to control you. All right. In other words, are you going to take life by the horn, or are you going to allow yourself to be trampled? We are the masters of our own destinies, and Uruz is here to remind ourselves of our own power and agency. Where there is a will, there is a way. Okay, again, Uruz is a proud creature. In magic, Uruz is a great rune for clearing away obstacles, all right? There is nothing left of anything after a stampede of bulls. And in my blog post, I'm like, how's that working for you, Chicago? Because the Chicago Bulls actually have a graphic of bulls running and clearing away absolutely nothing. I'm like, if you guys are going to use that imagery of stampeding bulls and, you know, you really need to actually clear away the other team. So just saying, they're not doing anything, they're just there, but I digress. All right. It is an offensive rune. All right. So should you find yourself in need to protect yourself, call upon Uruz responsibly. All right. I will leave that up to your soul discretion. All right. Oftentimes in life, we find ourselves drained of energy and metal. Uruz can be used to replenish our personal stores. It is also an incredible rune to call upon at the beginning of a new journey or phase in life. After all, it is primal energy, its primary energy is transformative, so why not harness that energy to your own benefit, such as at the start of a new job, at the beginning of a new school year, or any other event of transition, maybe a new maybe a new marriage, or graduating high school or college, maybe, well, I don't know, the start of a Saturn return, anyone? You know? When I was, as a fun, critical thinking exercise, I was making like, hey, can anyone think of a cool, tarot association? The best I got, by the way, was judgment. Someone mentioned to me, and Paxson also mentioned it as well, that Aleph is the first rune, or excuse me, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, translates the ox, which is associated with the, you guessed it, first card in the tarot, which is the Fool, which is the beginning of new journeys. So found that really interesting as well, especially since I thought that the card Uruz, excuse me, the rune Uruz would be really good for using at the start of a new journey for transformation and manifestation. So I know, however you might use that. So anyways, because of its association with iron, Uruz could be used for purification. I have not tried that, but the poems do make the suggestion. It also makes references to fertility, so there's also that to consider. And because it does have a reference to iron, it also is associated with Thor. So, all things to keep in mind there. If you have stayed with me to the end of this, thank you so much for doing so. I really appreciate that. Again, like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate all that. I do welcome your questions because that is how I learn. Don't forget to check out the blog post. If you haven't, follow me at Facebook, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram for more fun, awesome, witchy, and heathenry things. And hopefully I will have more super awesome, cool things up soon, very much so. So anyways, in the meantime, happy retrograde, and may it be more Freddy and less retrograde. I'm still, y'all have a good one. Bye.